October. Who was EV owners? To you. Who in the room are likely to be EV owners after the 18th of October? Oh, good on you. That's the same. Good on you. Good on you. I should say who's new. That's fine. That's fine. But so that's good. So pat yourself on the back, guys. We did it. We did it. We did it. Does anyone here work for the Victorian state government? Okay. Okay, undercover. Are there any lawyers or journalists in the audience? Okay. That's all right. Only one undercover. That's fine. That's fine. No, I just wanted to double check. I'm not going to be rude or rude or anything. So look, with this High Court case, I'm looking at hoping slice it up tonight, dissect it, see what it's made of. It's not something I've ever been involved with before. And when I talked to some people that didn't click, what, you were involved with a High Court case? My God, how did that happen, you know? So it was a very good prompt to really reflect, because this is a moment in my history that will never happen again, and hopefully it's a moment in all of our history that will never happen again. So before we get into detail, I think we really should just reflect and meditate for 1 minute on how not to do it. So look, I have to apologise. I wanted to share that because the theme of the vibe has been such a big theme throughout this High Court case. My client sent that to me when he first learned that I was involved. And I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago after the announcement came out, and I'm walking around looking at bits and pieces, and I hear this little voice behind me, "Hey, you got Dennis Denuto with you? You got Dennis Denuto?" So, oh my God. So, and it's just a classic. And the lawyers, a journalist asked me about the vibe and the castle, and led me into making some comments about the vibe in the castle, and I apologised to the lawyers, and they said, "Kath, it's okay, as long as you didn't compare us to Dennis Denuto, we're okay." So I just had to put that up front because it's such a classic thing that's been all part of it. So look, what I'm hoping to do tonight is share some new things with people. Some people that know me well will probably not find anything new in this presentation tonight, so sorry to you guys. But for those who haven't followed it religiously, there will hopefully be some new things, and hopefully there's some good seeds for the future as well. So what I'm hoping to do is at the end of the session, you know what the decision was. You know why. Why did I get involved? Why me? When did all this happen? How did it feel? Who was involved? And where to next? And at the end of the session, if you're happy, we can keep Q&A to the end. My theory is that I will have answered all your questions, so we won't need a Q&A, but that's where we're hoping to go. So you can see from the picture up there that that was the notice of filing, and that was the notice of constitutional matter. So that's essentially where it started. So if we get into the detail, what was this decision? So you guys know some things about it. I'm starting right from the end. This was a decision on the 18th of October. The High Court made this order. And there was 2 questions that was challenged in this case. The first question that they needed to answer was this zero and low emissions vehicle distance charge invalid on the basis that it imposes a duty of excise? They answered yes, so that means the Victorian government cannot implement this tax. And the second question, who should pay the cost of the proceedings? Thankfully, it's the defendant, which means Victoria pays the costs and I keep my house. So that was the decision that came out on the 18th of October. And what happened? This is how the media saw it. You know, well, High Court dumps Victoria's worst EV tax, blah, 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 blah. So you guys would have seen the headlines. You would have been excited to see the news. I was extremely excited to get the outcome. These are just some of the headlines. Of course, you know, it caught everybody off guard. That's interesting. The High Court zaps this, you know, state electric vehicle tax, and it might threaten other taxes. So we'll hold that thought. Was it catching everybody off guard? Don't know. We can think about that later. So that was what the decision was. Maybe let's go back one step and ask, actually, what is the High Court? So has anyone here been in the High Court apart from Paul? Has anyone stood in the High Court even as a tourist? Yeah, a couple. Well, you guys are in a better position than what I was, having been in there. I had never been in the High Court. So just as a courtesy, the High Court is the highest court in the Australian judicial system. It hears matters involving disputes about the Constitution. And given this case wasn't about EV tax per se, it wasn't about the environment, it wasn't about how unfair it is, it actually challenged the Constitution. So it went straight to the High Court to start with. And the important thing, the High Court is the final court of appeal. So Victoria has nowhere to go. And this little chart shows you the hierarchy of courts in the Australian legal system. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an expert, but that's basically where it is. So the High Court is where the buck stops. So they've made their decision, end of story. So here's a picture. Paul stood in the High Court the other day and said, that's the picture that I stood next to where Kath stood. When you walk it, it's very high. It's very high. You can see it's very high. And as we mentioned before this prezzo started, apparently the architectural theme is brutalism. So I don't know what that means about our judicial system. It's quite brutal, but there's a couple of photos from the High Court. Now, why me? Why did I get involved with this? I mean, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an activist, I'm a mum, I live in the suburbs, I grew up in the country. You know, why would I get involved with this? I guess the seeds and the sprouts for this probably started a long time ago. Back in 2006, when Brendan was only a little thing there, and I read a book called The Weather Makers by Tim Flannery, and that very much opened my eyes to the issue with climate change. And I had been taking many years of action to retrofit our home with my family to move from a 2-star to a 7-star. We got involved with Renew Sustainable House Day. These slides are taken from Renew Sustainable House Day. If anyone's interested, you can look at the link just to explain how we got there. So in my house, we were trying to do what we could do to reduce emissions and reduce impact on the environment. Through taking action, I was getting very frustrated with the lack of climate action in Australia. You might remember the decade of denial and delay we all lived through. I have not forgiven people for the decade of denial and delay. I'm still working on it. So this was the beginning. And of course, you take action in your home, you do what you can to reduce emissions in the home, but that's only part of it. What do you do on the road? So we bought our first electric vehicle in 2012, the first gen Nissan Leaf. We installed the charger. There's Brendan's little head at primary school looking around the corner seeing what's going on. So we were an early adopter. I didn't know what the early adopter meant until probably just recently. So in 2012, think back to what you guys are doing in 2012. There was no EVs on the road. When we look at those graphs that Riz shows us, to look at that exponential growth, 2011, 12, 13, nothing's happening. Absolutely nothing's happening. And we're cruising around in the Nissan Leaf thinking, this is great, everyone's going to do this. Not really. Not until, you know, a lot later. So we had that for 5 years. We upgraded to a BMW i3 in 2017. That's out in the car park at the moment. You would have walked past and kicked the tyres on the way in. We joined AEVA in 2018, and we have changed our charge point now. We've got a Zappy for anyone interested. We've got a Tesla Model 3 long range as well to get rid of the diesel. And just the i3 that's out in the car park, it'd be the only i3 I reckon in Australia. It's got a white roof. They come with a black roof. Don't understand why they do black roof for Australia, but we got it vinyl wrapped, just for information. So we're taking action in the home, we're taking action on the roads. So that's all very fine. So why else? Why else would I get involved? Remember what the leadership was like. Remember Scott Morrison took a lump of coal into Parliament. I mean, come on, people. So as a mum, as a citizen, as a person who's passionate about climate action, I see a lack of global and national leadership. I'm very upset with what happened in 2019 with the politicisation of EVs. As an engineer and a science person, I'm very upset with the misinformation and lies which goes on. And of course, we had the pandemic lockdown that went on for a long time. So this is all seeds that's happening in the background. And, you know, I started out trying to be the change that you want to see. And slowly it's getting to be, if not me, who? If not now, when? So my level of activation or annoyance or desperation or whatever was getting more and more. And back, if we take a quick trip down memory lane, you might also remember this came along. Now, language warning, guys, just language warning. If you don't remember this, this came out in April 2021, and this explains why something had to be done.
Could have picked the PG version.
So that came out in April 2021 during the second year of Melbourne's lockdown. So do you remember that? It was a call to arms. So if we think about why did I get involved? There's multiple reasons there. It's been building up for a while, a bit like an ugly volcano. And so when did this happen? So it really started, I went back through my emails, and the first email that I had about the protests against the EV tax was on the 20th of November. So the Australia Institute put out a survey, petitions, whatever it was. We had the legislation introduced in March 2021 to the Victorian Parliament. The EV Council, if you remember, Stop the Clean Air Tax, had a campaign going. You know, I called MPs, I wrote letters, I signed petitions, I whinged to anyone in this room who would listen to me whinge. And of course, the legislation still got passed. So that happened in June 2021. It went through the lower house. We protested. It still went through the upper house. So as a citizen, I asked myself, you know, how do you affect change? How do we stop these things from happening when we know this is the wrong decision, it's the wrong direction? You know, on the 1st of July 2021, the tax came into effect. It was a very quickly implemented tax. Dan Andrews is in hospital with a broken back at the time. And of course, we all got taxed from the 1st of July onwards in 2021. I made a phone call to the lawyers in 23rd of July 2021. There was two things that was also happening in my life at that time. One, the equity generation lawyers were involved with the Sharma versus the Environment Minister case. It was a landmark case where school children that took the Environment Minister to court saying you have a duty of care. So you cannot approve this Vickery coal mine, and they won. They won in the federal court. It was overturned by the full bench of the federal court a year later, but that was happening, and I'm thinking, wow, if these kids can do it, surely a grumpy old woman like me can do it, you know. I found it really inspiring, and they were the same age as my son, or younger. And I thought, this is a mechanism for change. Climate litigation is a thing. I'd never considered it. I was also doing a SHIFT group at the time. Now, SHIFT doesn't exist anymore, but it was a group of volunteers at the time that were trying to teach civilians the tools of change. So you use your voice, you use your vote, you use your dollars, you use your time. So what are the tools that us citizens have to affect change? So it was all about the basics of activism. And of course, I wasn't an activist. I'd never been to a protest. I'm not political. I'm not part of any political party. And at that time, I could see these things happening. You could see the build-up over the many years, so I rang the lawyers. So that's how I got involved. Now, when did it start? So on the 16th of September, all the legal documents were filed in the High Court. That's the article from The Driven, and then the media went slightly nuts for a day. So here's a couple of headlines that came out. I won't bore you with all the details. It seems like a long time ago now. Even the SHIFT group had a little plug at the SHIFT group in the corner there. I know there was people in this room that I didn't tell. I was having conversations for a month or two with lawyers, and as they said, Jesus, Kath, you kept that close to your chest, you know, and there was other people that said, well, I knew you were an activist, but this has taken it to another level, you know, so it was interesting, and it was probably interesting for the guys in the room as well. So that's where it started. Now, when did legal things follow? So what are these legal things? There's a big list of the legal things. If we look at the anatomy of a High Court case and you slice it up into bits, these are the bits. But basically, 16th of September we filed it. We had a year and a month of written submissions to and fro. So that's a whole year where I'm just reviewing legal documents. They're flying around. I'm not really doing anything much per se after the initial media. And it's all privileged, confidential, privileged information. And we also had interventions, which I didn't know about at the time, but when I saw New South Wales intervened, I thought something had gone wrong. And all it means is that because it's a constitutional case, all the other states and territories are allowed to have a say. So we, as plaintiffs, said, you know, High Court, we say these guys can't do that on the basis of the Constitution because it's a national issue. Every other state and territory gets to look at it, and if they want to, they can say, we're on Victoria's side. So every other state and territory intervened on behalf of Victoria during that year and a month. We had the 3 days of oral arguments presented in the High Court over 3 days, and I was in Canberra for those 3 days. That was a very significant 3 days. And then there was still another 2 months after that hearing for the Commonwealth to submit some information and Victoria to submit some more information. So the clock's still ticking, so it's still going on. And then their judgment was reserved for 6 months, which means the High Court thinks about it, they deliberate, they argue amongst themselves, and then finally we had the decision on the 18th of October, which is really just over a month ago. So that's the entire case in a nutshell, with every bloody document that was coming to and fro, to and fro, to and fro. So that's how it all happened. Now, how did it feel? I'm quite happy to say I was a bit naive at the start, and I think I went in with my eyes wide shut to a certain extent. I wasn't too daunted at the start. It wasn't really until I got to the High Court that I realised this is massive. This is absolutely massive. And it was very exciting, it was daunting, and it was an ultimate privilege to be involved. This is my little picture. Here's Exhibit A here. I took 46 pages of notes in the High Court. If anyone's interested, you won't be. Just to keep myself awake and engaged in trying to work out what's going on. That's my little picture of the full bench of the High Court. They had 7 helpers behind them. There was 42 people, lawyers, silks, in that legal circle with 7 other people supporting them, and we had 30 to 40 people as spectators on the first day. So, as I said, it wasn't until I got in that room and I saw all of these barristers and the lawyers said, Kath, you've got no idea how much money's in this room. It's like, whoa, okay. And the lawyer who was involved with this, his father came up from Sydney to be with him for 3 days because his son's in the High Court. And Equity Generation lawyers shut their office down for the 3 days and said, everybody go to the High Court. This is a once in a lifetime thing. Go to the High Court. You'll never have this chance again. So they shut their office down and sent everybody there. So it's not until you see it and you see the media, you see the expression on the justices' faces when everyone gets up and introduces themselves, and there's another one, and there's another one in a black cape, and another one, and another one. There was 42 people. It was amazing. So it was very exciting, daunting, and a privilege. That's the way I view it. I was in tears at the end of the 3 days when I said goodbye and thank you to everyone, because it just really hit me like a bombshell. Like, this is massive, absolutely massive. The actual proceedings I found quite fascinating, very strict rules. The actual arguments, when you talk about oral arguments, it's not like an argument like I would have at the pub. It is very much a very, very polite procedural thing. It's not like question time in Parliament where people are bagging each other out and yelling at each other. Very, very polite and procedural. Their language, their use of language is incredibly romantic. I have another exhibit here, which is my favourite phrases from High Court things, okay, if anyone's interested, but their use of language is so romantic. The actual proceedings, a big historical journey from pre-Federation times. We went back to 1755 dictionary to understand what an excise was or it wasn't. And there was lots and lots of conversations about previous judgments and what it did or didn't mean. And of course, I'm sitting there for 3 days next to Chris writing down notes thinking, yeah, this is great. But I have to admit, there were certainly plenty of times where it was a bit confusing and blah, blah, blah. And you can see, I think on the second day, my notes started to have the word blah, blah, blah in it, okay? That's with great respect. Okay, so I certainly, as a layperson, I didn't know everything that was going on, but there you go. Now, how did the media feel? I'm happy to admit the media was one reason I really thought about seriously, do I really want to put my hand up and do this? But thankfully, my worst fears were not eventuated. So after the launch, it was pretty amazing when the Commonwealth intervened on our behalf. This little snippet was taken out of an email that the lawyer sent to the Chuff supporters. The stakes are high. A recent article described the case as the largest constitutional stoush in 25 years. That's pretty massive. So it was pretty interesting when the Commonwealth intervened, exciting the day before. There's pictures of it during. I've never stood up in front of people with cameras and, you know, national media. We got interviewed the day after about how we did it, and there's a few behind-the-scenes pictures. So having the media come to your house and interrogate you in the kitchen and have Brendan there taking pictures of us, you know, it's all very good. So it was daunting, but I have to admit my confidence in dealing with media now is way better than what it was 2 years ago, but it's not something that I'd choose to do. So who was involved? So by now everybody knows it's the full bench of the High Court. They're all the High Court justices. We had some plaintiffs, which is us. We had the defendant, which is Victoria. We had interveners, which are all on Victoria's side. So it was Victoria versus us. And on our side, we had the Commonwealth, and we also had the Australian Trucking Association. Now, they didn't appear in court. They appeared amicus curiae, which I believe means friends of the court. They just wrote some documents and said, justices, please read this, mate. Okay, and that's what they did. And they put their 2 bobs worth in. And to be honest, I could understand their submission a lot better than I could understand any other intervener's submission. So that was who was involved. Now, also, who is Vanderstock? So the case is called Vanderstock versus Victoria. Chris was the first plaintiff. He has the battery electric vehicle. He lives in the western suburbs. He's the nurse, he's the dad. I'm the mum who's got the plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. I'm the mum, I'm the engineer over on the eastern suburbs. Does anyone here, who here knew of Chris Vanderstock before this case? Okay, only a couple of people. So now he's a household name and he can have the last word on this. So thank you, Chris. He says it a lot better than I do. So that's a very nice summary, I think, of the whole case. So that's who Chris Vanderstock is. So the next and the last question here really is where to next. So if we think about where to next for the tax, this is where to next. Some of you guys that drove EVs would have got an email from Vic Roads on the day saying, oh, the High Court's just made a decision. No, we'll just, okay, that's what they did on the day. And the Vic Roads website, there's a very important thing here. It just says, motorists who are due to renew their zero and low emission vehicle should, continue to do so. Yes, but customers are no longer required to pay an upcoming level-related invoice or provide a vehicle odometer reading. Those are very nice words to see in print. It's still there. Don't ask me about refunds yet because nobody knows. This only happened just over a month ago. But at the moment, the tax is going nowhere. Vic Roads have said, yep, it's going nowhere. So that's where to for the tax. Now, where to for the Treasurer? You might recall on the day Tim Pallas popped out of Parliament and he had a posse of media around him. And he was quite shocked and disappointed. What do you mean? This is good tax, they've got to pay their fair share. I mean, it's only right. And he said the High Court has reimagined the Australian Constitution. So has the High Court reimagined the Australian Constitution? My answer to that is no. If anything, this decision might make it actually clearer and easier to use for the 21st century and beyond. Why do I say that? We have to think about where was constitutional law at the start of this case. So I'm going to bombard you with some words for a few seconds. These words are not my words. This is from the High Court ruling. There was a 393-page document of reasons why the decision was made. So at the beginning, there was an open question. Can a consumption tax be an excise? This is a consumption tax. We are being taxed to consume our car, to drive our car. Can that be an excise? That question has been there for 25 years. There has been unresolved differences in judicial approach. The High Court has said that in their reasons. There's incoherence, inconsistency, instability. These are the words from the justices who supported our argument. Even the justices who disagreed with our argument said there's been a potted history of the use of the word excise. There's been a century of dispute. Language in this court's decisions has not always been consistent. The essential meaning and application of an excise has long been a matter of great controversy. So has the High Court reimagined anything, or are they just trying to work stuff out? So there has been divergent views and divergent explanations, and I think my favourite quote out of the 393-page document is Justice Stephen observed that the phrase duty of excise had never possessed any exact application. His Honour noted that this phrase concealed no ultimate truth, awaiting recognition by the judicial fossicker. So I'd actually like you to guys turn to the person next to you and say, hey, you judicial fossicker, is that an insult or is that a compliment? I love the language, okay? So when I hear the word judicial fossicker, I'm just not sure what I mean. But I guess the point is, constitutional law was not black and white. For the last 25 years, there's been divergent views and divergent explanations. So for Tim Pallas to come out and say, what the hell? I never thought this was going to happen. They've reimagined the Constitution. They haven't. If anything, they've just made that bright line to fix it. If you had read the summary page, they actually reopened and overturned a previous case called Dickinson's Arcade from 1974. That's no longer good law, that's bad law. And the capital duplicators in HAR, which was quoted in this all the way through, is still good law. So for the last 25 years has been an open question. Thankfully, the High Court says, yeah, consumption tax can be an excise. So that's where it was at. So where to for Victoria then? This tax has been unplugged. Charge is ended. Okay, that's the Herald Sun, if you saw it the next day. Probably one of the best cartoons I've got on my fridge at the moment. So that's where to for Victoria. Where else? Victoria did have the trophy of the worst electric vehicle policy in the world. Dan Andrews there, he got the phone call, I'm sorry, but you're going to have to give it back. It's not like the Glenn George trophy, thankfully, handing over from one excellent guy to another excellent guy. So yeah, the High Court drove their EV Chevy through the levee. So Victoria's got nowhere to go. And where to for Australia? Now, there's three big things that this country needs to do, and there won't be any surprises for you guys. One, we have to clean up transport systems. We know that. I don't need to go through the detail. We've got to clean them up. Two, we've got to fairly fund transport systems. So road funding at the moment was the basis on which this tax was implemented. We know federal fuel excise hasn't been used exclusively for roads since '59, hasn't even been used at all for roads since 1992. So it just goes into consolidated revenue. So how do you want to fund it? Have the conversation. This has never been about not wanting to pay your fair share. It's been about do not disincentivise clean technology when we need everyone to go to EVs if we can. So, and the third thing really, we need to somehow reform the structural tax system. Now these things are not in isolation. I see them as all interlinked. The big orange one, the tax system, it is a bit of a mess. Even the day after this decision came down in the financial review, you know, the structural tax reform problem has been repeatedly diagnosed by multiple reviews. The Henry Review, Joe Hockey's Rethink discussion, productivity commissions, IMF, OECD. They acknowledge there's so many experts, again, I'm not a tax expert, but there's so many people that know that the tax system is a mess. It needs to be reformed, it needs to be restructured so that we can get not so much burden falling on productive work, but have more, you know, too little is borne by efficient taxes on consumption of land. So, you know, guys, you've known for 20, 30 years it's a mess, do something. And even, it was the 30th of October, I think this comes from, Danielle Wood, she's the boss of the Productivity Commission. The Grattan Institute put a talk on about tax reform in Australia. Is it an impossible dream? You can go there and have a look at it. It goes through all the details about how messy the tax system is. What are we going to do about it? I don't know. No one in this room is going to fix it with a magic wand, but it is something that needs to be dealt with. So they're the three big things that I've learnt out of this. And there also is another thing. Where else? So this constitution, right, that apparently, you know, the High Court's reimagined. We've just gone through a fairly bitter and disappointing voice referendum. So how do we deal with this constitution that we're governed by? Again, I'm not a constitutional lawyer, but there was a report in the ABC that acknowledged that we have unfinished constitutional business. It acknowledged that we are governed by a horse and buggy document. It's never been updated. We have race clauses in the Constitution. There is issues with the basic way of governance in this country that comes back to the Constitution. So this argument between Victoria and us and all the interveners was about the Constitution. There are structural issues with the Constitution. So yeah, it would be good if we could reimagine it. I know changing it is very difficult through referendum, but we have a document that is probably not fit for purpose. What are we going to do as a nation? I don't have the answer. You know, Tim Palace said it, they've been reimagined. I'd suggest there's another few R words there that we might use, you know, if we could. And there was two justices, both dissenting justices, against the decision that said that this makes a fresh start, but in a negative way, according to them. I actually would challenge it and say we need a fresh start somehow. So, and again, it's bigger than me, but the Constitution is sitting there as a bit of a, how do we want to deal with it? So that's where to next. So please, over to you guys. I hope I've answered as many questions, or Chris has answered as many questions, but please just let's have a conversation. Any questions? Hello, it's Kath here again with a final word. In case you missed it, on Wednesday the 29th of November 2023, it was announced that the Victorian Government will refund the unconstitutional EV tax with interest. I think this is a fair decision and it'll be welcomed by all Victorian EV drivers. So after 2 years and 2 months, this case is now closed. I look forward to better EV policy in future that incentivises, not penalises, decarbonising transport. Thanks for watching.